Cool. From Erda, okay, great. No FIFA fans here, more shooter games. John, I actually I had a conversation yesterday with a guy who, it was interesting. I'm a small investor in a champagne house, and they had a kind of a house move thing yesterday for a small amount of people. In these Corona times, we don't gather in such big groups in Sweden, and I guess even less in the rest of the world. But anyways, this was the last guy I expected to be a gamer, for various reasons. But then when we got into that, he was really into skateboard and snowboarding games. And he was, and I brought actually up because I knew you worked on, what was it called, Sean White?
AMP3.
AMP3, Sean White, AMP3, and he was like, yeah, I played that game, it was great. And he went in such detail. He was like, yeah, you can I take the board off and walk around in kind of like an open world environment. That was really great. Blah blah. I was like, yeah, I know the guy who worked on that.
Yeah, the lead, my friend Aaron Connors, with the lead designer of AMP3, one of the designers of AMP3, he was the lead designer for that Sean White snowboarding game. After
cool.
After Indy built.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, they don't make a lot of snowboarding games anymore. We need more snowboarding games.
Why is that?
I don't know. I guess there was always this debate between SSX is kind of too arcadey, and then Amped was too hardcore, too legit. So I don't know if they ever find the right balance between authentic and arcade.
All right. Remember the thing we figured out the last time, with turning on, turning off the screen thing?
Yeah.
I think that worked really nicely the last webinar we did.
Yeah. Do you think we should get started, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're ready.
Okay. So we have quite a few attendees joining already. Thank you very much. And everybody who has already joined, and I'll repeat this again during the course of the webinar, please feel free to use the chat. Definitely use the Q&A, ask us questions throughout. We'll be kind of curating those questions as they're coming in, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible, both during the webinar and also at the end of the webinar. So first of all, I'd like to just quickly introduce Patrick Palm, who's the CEO of Favro. Myself, John Leslie, I'm an Agile coach at Broadcove Insights. And we have our special guest today, Sigurlína Ingvarsdóttir from Bonfire Studios. So let's first kick this off. I'm going to quickly share my screen again. So we're doing something different here today. Patrick came up with the brilliant idea of doing the entire webinar out of Favro instead of Google Slides or PowerPoint. So kind of, again, showing the power of the tool. You really can replace even PowerPoint and Google Slides, hopefully, with Favro.
And we should point out that wasn't my idea, actually. I've seen, people at, our clients, and also, in our own team, do the same. And I was like, why aren't we the best users of, what others are doing already? So.
Yeah, you said you saw somebody present at a GDC back when you could go to GDC.
Yeah.
On a PS4. Yeah,
that's a slightly different story though, because it's kind of, they really wanted to make a point out of, the platform, and they used the platform, and it was beautiful. And then, I told that story in the office, and then our operations director, was also my assistant, she was like, okay. And she started to do the same, and it just works actually much better because everything becomes live. So yeah, that was the backstory.
Hopefully it turned out pretty good. We'll see. So to start things off, we have the agenda here in a Favro timeline. We're gonna just, again, go through the speakers, a little bit more background on ourselves, especially Sigurlína, Lena. And then we're going to have a Q&A, a chat. Patrick, an interview with Sigurlína, talk about her experiences with going remote from a game studio standpoint, and also her background. Then I'm going to dive in and really get into kind of the meat of the webinar and talk about the remote game studio. What are the benefits? What are the challenges? And what are the solutions? We'll talk a little bit about this Favro Quick Start package that both Favro and Broadcove Insights have put together. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. So to get things rolling, here are today's speakers. And Patrick, please take it away.
Thank you so much, John. You know, this is our third webinar this summer, and it's been a great experience so far. One of the fantastic things, you know, running this company is that we have some, you know, very innovative clients, and that means that we meet some really brilliant people. And we thought, well, maybe we should start, you know, inviting people from some of our clients and doing these kind of, you know, webinars. So, you know, that's the background to, you know, why we do this in the first place. I'm going to give you, you know, just like the short origin story of Favro or Favro. There's a bit of debate, you know, how do you actually pronounce it? And, you know, from our point of view, you can pronounce it whatever way you want. We said Favro in the beginning. I increasingly say Favro because we have so many clients that are in the US, and they tend to say Favro, and you know, so I start to gravitate towards that. But if you hear me kind of switching between Favro and Favro, you know, that's the reason, and it's fine. But the backstory to, you know, why we got into this in the first place is that my two fellow co-founders and I, we started and run another company called Handsoft before, and we had clients in many industries. You know, it was, you know, aerospace, telecom, but a lot of game development, and that's also in many ways our backgrounds. And you know, we built that company to great success, and we sold it, and we had this idea. And the idea was that we saw that the Agile way of working was really crossing over from software development into any kind of team. You know, marketing, operations, you know, leadership teams, you know, really anyone. And we thought, okay, if we could design a new tool from scratch that would be, you know, cloud-based, and living up to kind of an enterprise grade level of security and data governance, which is especially important now with, you know, GDPR and similar things. And secondly, that would be, you know, designed for everyone, not just software developers. And thirdly, that would embrace the fact that most organizations, especially large organizations, are very organic by nature. You know, there's always this idea that, you know, they have this, you know, structure, and this is how we organized, and, you know, these are processes, and it just never works like, you know, that in reality. You know, people move around, you know, things change, and, you know, 6 months after you implemented a tool and the specific framework, you know, things are different. So we thought, okay, you know, if we design something that embraces that, and that is, you know, basically what would be the most agile tool. That was our you know, origin, you know, our founding idea, you know, of Favro. And we had, you know, we've been in the industry for a long time. We were able to finance, you know, building something, you know, for this pretty daunting challenge from the beginning. I mean, typically startups, you know, you have to start with a smaller challenge, and you kind of step by step, you know, build yourself up to kind of enterprise capability. But we said, okay, you know, we're gonna invest, and we're gonna go straight for the most you know, daunting challenge here, and that is basically the background to you know, why we started this. And there's been many. I mean, we basically have three kinds of clients. You know, it's startups, it's enterprises, and it's unicorns that are, you know, trying to stay agile as they grow very fast. But if I look more industry-wise, it's also quite widespread. But one industry definitely stands out as being a very already big customer base for us, but also a very rapidly growing one, and that is game development. And with that, we thought, okay, we're going to do a couple of webinars now specifically for game developers, and today, is one of them, and I'm super excited, Lina, that you could join us. In one of our previous webinars, we had Nico, and she was using Favro when she was at Riot Games, and there it's really thousands of users of Favro, and that was good. Now when Corona hit, and they were already very used to working in an online fashion, but then after that, she was using Favro at that game company, which is much smaller. They make amazing games. I played them myself, but a totally different setting. Small studio. Very indie. Extremely creative. I don't know them well enough to say, but I would guess that they're probably the kind of studio that are not super heavy on processes, and maybe not super heavy on tools. And I see that's a bit of a pattern that many of the studios that come on board and use Favro are relatively new form of studios that are maybe not necessarily the biggest fans of processes and tools. And it seems like if you're going to choose, let's say, the least bad tools, so to say, they pick Favro, and I take that as a compliment. That's if you have a developer or an artist saying this is not too bad, that is actually great. But anyways, going into the meat of it here, I needed to have a look. When was the first time I met you, Lina? And I searched through my emails, and it was in 2007 when you were at CCP in Iceland, and we just realized this is a long time ago. And I would like to believe that it hasn't been that many years, but the thing I can conclude from just looking at that kind of email thread there, when Haldor, who was the CTO at the time, introduced us, was that already back then you seemed to have a lot of weight in an organization that was already quite big and very fast growing, and putting a lot of trust in you in helping them manage the challenges of going from a little bit smaller to much bigger. So there's been a lot of water under the bridges since then, and I'll leave that story to you. But I can just conclude that already back then, you're a big name. So when we said now that you're one of the top names in production and game development, that was probably true already 13 years ago. So Lina, why don't you give us a bit of the story, from the CCP to where you are today.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's such a long time since 2007, which was the year after I started in the games industry in my native Iceland at CCP. Originally, I studied industrial engineering, and I worked in pharmaceutical project management, and I meant to have this very, very serious business-oriented career. So I worked in pharmaceuticals for a few years, and I really enjoyed that. I found pharmaceutical developers to be generally nerdy people with weird interests, and I really enjoyed working with them. But then I felt like I should try something more, something different, and I went into business development in retail, which was excruciatingly boring. And that's when I accidentally kind of decided that I should do something fun. And I had a lot of friends that were working for this Icelandic game company, makers of EVE Online, CCP. So I started working for them as a producer in 2006, and it was just for me an incredible transition from the sort of the boring and the beige world of really grown-up work, either in pharmaceuticals or in retail. And I wasn't that big of a gamer, but I was very interested in IP development and in science fiction and in world building, and CCP was definitely doing all of that with EVE Online, which is a fantastic and a very unique game world. And it was a company, when I joined CCP back in the day, they really needed people with experience from kind of proper companies, and so it was fun for me to come and kind of apply my project management learnings to a company that was so different to the other companies that I had worked for. And And CCP during the time that I was there grew from a company of about 150 people up to about 600 people when I left 5 years later, and had operations in Iceland and in the US and in the UK and in Shanghai. So it gave me this experience of working with distributed teams, with different cultures, doing, I think back then in 2009 and 10, doing a lot of remote work through video conferencing, et cetera, which seemed very new at the time, but has now become everyone's reality, I guess, in the times of Corona. But after 5 years at CCP, I was hired at Ubisoft and moved with my family to Malmö in Sweden, where I worked on the project that became The Division, before then moving over to DICE, which is a subsidiary of EA in Stockholm, where I worked on Mirror's Edge as the senior producer, and then was the producer responsible for starting up and running the Star Wars Battlefront franchise, which was, as you can imagine, for a sci-fi geek and someone who's really into that type of universe, like working on the first Star Wars game in that big collaboration between EA and Lucasfilm and Disney was an incredible adventure. And so I worked with a fantastic team in Stockholm, but also in the US and in Canada and in the UK on that franchise, before then moving again to Vancouver, where I worked on strategy for the FIFA franchise for 2 years, which was a completely different experience. If you can imagine, making a Star Wars shooter and then going into making a sports video game, which is, released once a year. It's incredibly demanding. Everything has to happen incredibly fast. And it's one of absolutely the biggest video game franchises of the world. But it's very different to work in a Swedish studio on a sci-fi shooter versus a studio in North America on a sports franchise. So I feel like I've seen all kinds of teams in all kinds of cultures creating all kinds of games, and each of these different teams and IPs presents a different challenge. And the FIFA team is incredibly large and is working with incredibly tight and well-defined processes. And after 2 years of working there, I actually joined a small startup in Southern California, where I'm right now, called Bonfire Studios, where a group of pretty veteran developers with a passion for making great games and a passion for culture have come together to make games differently than they've done before in very big companies. So I'm now working with a team of or a company of about 30 people, creating a new company, a new game, a new team, building new processes and new structure, all very much based on culture. So I've had quite the journey, I think, over these past 13 years since we first met, Patrick.
It's quite a spectrum, and since you were on the FIFA team, I have to say that Bonfire is a little bit more than just veterans. I mean, it is really a group of superstars coming together, and I'm very excited to see what's going to come out. It's kind of like you created the Manchester United of game development. You should probably read Alex Ferguson's book about how you actually manage a team when every player is a superstar, because I mean that brings its own challenges. And I think Alex Ferguson's book is probably one of the best reads on leadership in that kind of environment. Before going into some challenges, it would be interesting. Do you have any kind of direct reflections upon what could a small, relatively new studio learn from a big money machine that the FIFA franchise is, and vice versa? What can the big ones learn from many of these absolutely amazing smaller studios that are coming up now learn?
I think if I think about learnings from the FIFA team, I think one of the things that the FIFA team has done incredibly well, because time is at such a premium for a yearly franchise, decision making has to be incredibly quick, and scoping has to be incredibly precise, and the velocity needs to always be kept up. And so what I found with working with FIFA developers is that they have this incredibly pragmatic production mindset, but they're also working with a super established franchise, and the kind of the new game discovery for every iteration of the game is not that large, whereas we as a small studio, we're starting with a completely blank slate. So I think that what I think the learnings on both sides are having that production mindset is very, very important, but you can't bring it to bear too soon, because you want to have space for ideation, and we talk about making sure that we don't kill our ugly babies too early at Bonfire, because we want ideas, they come into the world and they're very imperfect and they get better through iteration, and for a long time they're pretty ugly babies. So it's important to not kill them too soon, but then don't chase something for too long when it's proven not to work. And I think if I look back at my time in FIFA, I think also coming now from a studio that's very very new, it's very diverse, it's people can bring all their expertise and their opinions and their ideas, but aligning a group like that takes way longer than it does for the very homogeneous, sort of very focused, very process heavy FIFA team. So I think both can learn something from each other, but I think that there are very, very different challenges in managing these types of teams.
So speaking about challenges, I made a post the other day, just kind of looking at some of the figures for our industry now. And I mean, what is amazing is that today the game industry is bigger than the movie and the music industry combined. We are literally the most successful part of the entertainment industry today, and that has been kind of almost like sneaking upon us the last 10 years. I mean, we're all three here, people that started, before we were in that situation, we kind of, we looked up to movies and we thought, those guys were really cool. And now, the biggest guys on the block are us. So it's a great time to be in game development. And one of my side things is I have a small investment company, and I invest in game studios and in game tech, and it's a really good time to be an investor in the game industry. So all of this is very, very good. But what we're seeing is, of course, also some challenges. Now Corona hit, and it's very clear that studios that were prepared for working in a distributed fashion have been doing really well. They have been able to continue to release entirely new games, and they've been doing well. And there's been some other studios that have sometimes quite openly admitted to that, okay, this is pretty hard for us. So one of the really big challenges we have is just how do we make sure that we can deliver and take advantage of this situation as game developers. The other challenge that has been extremely topical in the debate recently is diversity. If we look at the figures of who plays the games, it's a very diverse group, but if we look at studios, it is typically not a very diverse group. So for many other reasons, this is also a challenge in the industry. If we start with maybe that question on diversity, I think a good kickoff for that question is why shall we care? Why is the diversity important?
Well, I think that diversity is important because as you said, I mean, video games are the biggest medium on the planet right now, and they're played by everyone. And I mean, I think we see particularly with the rise of smart connected devices, people are playing games on all platforms, and they're playing games across all ages and all genders and all ethnicities. And if you think about the power of the medium, then I think that, video games, different to movies or music or books, they're interactive. So the player has the ability to be way more immersed and way more engaged in the experience than they do in any other medium. And what research has shown, I've actually spent quite a bit of time looking at research from both games and from other industry, and research shows us that what we see through media shapes our worldview. So as an example, and taking an example that's pretty close to home, when I was growing up in my native Iceland back in the 80s, the president of Iceland was a woman, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir. She was, I didn't know that at the time, but she was the first democratically elected head of state, female head of state in the world. But when I grew up, I just grew up with the idea that, obviously women could be presidents. And this has been proven that role models in different mediums are incredibly impactful. As an example, in 2013, the number of women or girls in the US that were practicing archery doubled. That's also the year that the Hunger Games and Brave were released. So we have all these examples of the way that media shapes behaviors, and it's incredibly powerful. So the way that I see it is, as the creators of the most important medium of the 21st century, we have an incredible power to shape behaviors. And I think that if we think about games in the past, they've had very stereotypical representations. They've often been created with a very traditional sort of male in their 30s or 40s as the protagonist. Think Nathan Drake from Uncharted. And I'm absolutely not dissing Uncharted in any way. I think it's a great game, but I think that we haven't been super innovative in the characters and the protagonists of our games. But I also think that that's pretty logical, because for most of the game studios that I've been a part of, the leadership has been predominantly male. The people who make decisions about which types of games are made are predominantly male, and generally video game teams have operated on the basis of assumption that it's a male team making a game about men, catered predominantly to men. And so this becomes this completely self-fulfilling prophecy. But what we see now, and we can take examples from movies as an example. If you think about Star Wars and the way that it was rebooted, it was basically rebooted from being a boy franchise to being an everyone franchise, and enjoying incredible commercial success. And if you look at the cast of the new Star Wars movies, you can see every age group, both genders, every ethnicity. So the data just shows us that creating inclusive experiences where everyone feels invited, makes great business sense, but it's also the right thing to do, that you're not just promoting, mindlessly promoting stereotypes.
Yeah, that's very true. I think a second argument is also, obviously we geek down a lot on things that have to do with organization, and what makes an innovative organization, and there's just a ton of research showing that a team which is more diverse is simply more creative. Now there's a lot of people that say that and use that as an argument for this is why we should work with diversity. What they typically don't go into is the fact that one of the benefits of having a more homogeneous team is that efficiency comes sooner. If you already know each other, you're kind of the same group, efficiency comes sooner. And so if you have a team which is very diverse, you need to find other things to unite around. This is very much a CEO level of question. Okay, so what is it that we as a team are going to unite around? What values, where we're going and so forth. You really have to think about that and then act on it. And then you can basically get the efficiency of a homogeneous group with the creativity and innovation of a diverse group. And that's when you can truly harvest the benefits of this. That's my opinion, but I also, I think, as we see it quite clearly, with clients and in research, and I think also from Favro. John, you always have a good example of, if you recruit in a very broad way, you kind of get diversity for free, so to say. And I was just reflecting upon, I think you said that in one of our earliest webinars, and I was reflecting upon that, and because we're only 22 people, but we spread across the world, and we cast our net extremely wide when we started Favro, and we ended up with a team which is super diverse in so many different dimensions, not just gender, but many other dimensions too, which is pretty cool. But it was actually not, we didn't have like a diversity plan. It was just that we really went global when we were thinking around talent and how we're going to work together, and that was the result that came out. And I think that's a good takeaway from that. So how do you, if you are a studio that are not in a position of kind of having the diversity from the beginning, because a lot of there's a lot of conversation now around, okay, well, how do we work with this? And most bigger studios, bigger publishers are very clearly stating that this is an important question for them. But how do we make sure that this is not just talk, that there's some actual actions? I mean, from a leader to a leader, what would you say? Okay, these are some concrete things you can do to actually make change.
Well, I think that you should definitely, diversity is, as you said, it's a CEO level question. If it's important to the studio to have the benefits of diversity, it also comes with the cost of diversity. Because I think what you said is, if you have a homogeneous studio with very clear processes and structure, things can be very, very efficient because you're not really creating that space for conversations and conflict. But if you have a diverse studio and you have all these different viewpoints and different perspectives, then that's going to it's going to take time for people to come together and have the conversations and understand each other's viewpoints. And you have to build a culture that allows for that to happen. You have to have the trust for people to really be vulnerable, to share differing opinions, and to be able to respectfully converse and then to disagree. And I think that as you said, many big companies right now are kind of jumping on the diversity wagon because they now realize that not only is it the right thing to do, but you kind of have to do that in today's climate. You can't be the company that's anti-diversity. That's not a great message. But the difference is, if you really care about it, if you really want the benefits of diversity, then it's going to, you're going to often have this situation where you have a group of candidates that are kind of very similar to the majority of the people that you have in your studio, and you're going to have what we call more diverse studios, or people who are different. And you often then get into the conversations, well, this person has more experience and they have their background is stronger, their competence in as defined by the skill that we're going after is perceived to be higher than this diverse candidate. And this, I think, can lead to the sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy that you continue to hire people who are like yourself because you feel like they're a better fit, they have skills that you understand better, but you then get this homogeneous team. And so you really have to understand also that the way that you evaluate candidates is based on your own internal models of how you assess people. That also might be very biased because you tend to rank the things that resonate with you and the things that you're familiar with and understand higher than new skills or new competencies that you might understand less. And I think that this is a super complex conversation, and it requires an understanding of a lot of nuance, and it also requires people, if they people often talk about diversity being super important until they get into the practicalities of hiring, when they default to kind of older behaviors. So if it is a priority, everyone in the organization has to be on board with it, and you have to also be able to engage with it.
I am one of the things that I think helps is, I try to always think about how is this person a culture add rather than a culture fit. I try to say, how do every person contribute to building the culture, one step further. That's I guess that's the best input I have. One thing that I thought about now when you said this, you know, a few years ago when hashtag Me Too was very topical, I wrote an article that was published and quite well spread, and then the French newspaper Le Monde did an interview, and they asked about leadership practices and, you know, how to change those. And you know, I said a couple of things that I thought, but I didn't really think they were very specific, to be honest. To I just thought they were, you know, good practices, and I had to ask the interview. I said, you know, the other people that you have interviewed, what have they said? You know, I was so curious. And you know, she was telling me a couple of the things that the other people that she interviewed have said, and I was like, yeah, but that just sounds like kind of good leadership. You know, it's not necessarily like we have to do something like totally different. It was more about having a couple of these things, you know, very, you know, top of mind. But I also think, you know, sincerity. I mean, you know, both John and I are, you know, middle-aged white men, and I think for us, this conversation is also, you know, a little bit awkward. You know, it's like we should probably not be in the front of it in many ways, because you know, we're not a representation of diversity, and you know, if you are in a CEO or senior leadership position, you know, these questions can be awkward. Do you have any advice for? I mean, I guess this is a bit close to home, but I really would like your opinion. You know, do you have advice to senior leaders, especially actually, you know, men from the minority group? You know, how do we make this less awkward so we get to more action?
I think that's a super great question. I think, you know, I can definitely sympathize that, you know, if you're a middle-aged white man today, you know, you feel like there's a lot of groups of people that are, you know, expressing their frustration and their pain and for, you know, having been discriminated against or mistreated. And I think that a lot of white men feel like, well, you know, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, I try to, you know, treat everyone with respect. I feel super awkward about participating in these conversations, and I don't feel like there's anything that I am doing that's not right. And you know, I feel somewhat unfairly judged and unfairly treated, and I find this to be a very painful and a fraught conversation, and I'm worried about, you know, saying the wrong things. So I definitely think that's true. But I think that, you know, and I had this conversation with a coworker recently where I was saying, well, I think that, you know, like someone like myself who's definitely struggled with feeling like an imposter early on in my career and feeling other and feeling different and feeling like, you know, my ideas aren't as valid because I'm not our game's core audience, and you know, someone who really struggled with fitting into the industry for a long time. I think that, you know, I don't really fight for diversity in my teams or within the games industry because it's a passion project of mine, and I really want to do that on top of my day job. I do it because I can feel the effects of discrimination, and I felt the effects of discrimination on my own skin, and I've accumulated a lot of scars and a lot of pain through my journey. And so when I engage in these conversations with my colleagues and my coworkers and share my experiences, I do that with the purposes of education and improvement for all. So what I would ask of the middle-aged white man is to say, okay, I recognize, I see your pain. I don't necessarily, you know, feel I'm contributing to it on a day-to-day basis, but I'm willing to listen and to learn and to understand your perspective and to engage in these conversations. Because I feel like the silence that we often see from white men is, you know, if I don't know what's happening in your head, I just think that you don't care. You might be struggling with all these complex emotions and really wanting to engage, but not knowing how. But if you don't reach out and if you don't participate in the conversation, the only thing I can read is that you don't care about it.
Cool. I think hopefully we can see this conversation as part of that then. If we switch over to something different, but also a big challenge right now, which is remote work. We've seen that some students were very well prepared for this, Some studios were even founded on the idea that, okay, we're going to be a distributed team from start. And for them, it's been almost like no change. And we've seen some teams who are truly struggling right now, and then everything in between. What do you, I mean, what's your playbook right now? I mean, how, you know, a studio that might not already be fully distributed, might not have the practices and tools and so forth in place, and, you know, have to walk, you know, have to make the journey to become a distributed studio. What is your, you know, kind of concrete, you know, tips for what to think and what to do?
I think that, you know, our experience has been that, you know, as a small, relatively new studio, where we have a strong culture of kind of personal autonomy and freedom, and a very good, you know, IT infrastructure. Like our experience of kind of having to transfer to remote work due to COVID was incredibly impressive, and I was definitely glad to not be a part of a multinational corporation with thousands of people, because I can't imagine what transitioning that online must feel like. But now that we're a few months into this, I mean, Zoom fatigue is very real, and I think that, you know, many studios are kind of having a similar experience where it's like, okay, we're now replicating the structure and the process and the way that we used to work as a mostly on location studio, but now having to figure out kind of remote first ways of working. And I think that's it's a super interesting challenge, and it's something that, you know, we talk about a lot at the studio. We're experimenting with different tools and different ways of working, and then you obviously couple it with the experience of now you're all of a sudden at home. You have, you know, your family at home during work hours. Your kids are there. You might need to homeschool them. Like different times work differently for different people. And so I think that, you know, this is you know, I think it's a super exciting time. I think it's a super interesting time. And I think one of the things that I at least have realized is that you know, many of us been working in open offices, and in these kind of team-based workspaces. I don't think I've talked to anyone who really misses the hustle and the bustle of the open office. So I think that you know, whatever the future holds is probably not going to be that. And I think that, you know, we're going to see this combination of on location with a heavy remote capabilities. And I think that also means that, you know, some people used to be super great, you know, engaging in person, but now all of a sudden you're doing most of your interactions through asynchronous means or through Zoom meetings. So, you know, all of a sudden new qualities and new competencies in kind of collaboration are going to make some people way better suited to the remote working situation than others. And I, you know, I think we're just at the start of that, but I think that, you know, we're seeing a tremendous acceleration of the remote work.
I have a good example of that. You know, before coronavirus, I was interviewed a few times around how to lead introverts, and now the bigger question is how to lead extroverts in an online environment. Because what I've seen is that actually some of the people that are struggling the most with this new environment are people that are quite extroverted. And you know, as a leader, you know, you need to think a little bit extra about how do you handle that. And the ones that are coping a bit better are people that have a more you know, introvert, you know, bias. How do you think that you'll go back to the normal like it was before, or do you think that there will be a new normal for your studio where, you know, you're not simply going back to how it was before Corona, but it's something, you know, different, more of a hybrid?
You know, I don't feel like I can answer that like conclusively, but my hunch is that, you know, the new normal is going to be more hybridized, as you say. I think that, you know, I feel like for just people in general, a lot of people have been realizing how much time they've been spending, you know, doing their daily commute to get to work on location, time that, you know, everyone has been saving right now. And I think that, people are realizing the opportunity to, to figure out how to do productive work remotely. And, that's probably going to cause some kind of, redistribution from cities just due to cost of living. And I think people will want to have more flexibility and more freedom. And I find it very likely that Bonfire, like every other place, is just going to be impacted by those trends and will, try and reconfigure in a way that's kind of best suited for the studio. But I think that the concern that productivity would drop massively due to kind of remote working is that's not proven to be a super relevant concern. I think the more relevant concern right now is how do you stop people from just kind of throwing themselves into work to escape kind of our very strange reality right now.
I guess you've seen. Have you seen the extra episode of Mythic Quest?
I have not. No, I need to.
You have to see that, because the point you made now is one of the themes of that specific episode.
Oh, that's awesome! I love that show.
Yeah. Great. There's a lot of things about that show that feels almost like too close to reality.
Absolutely.
John, you with Broadco, are an Agile partner of ours, and companies that are doing, strategic initiatives around moving into more Agile way of working. Typically, quite large organizations. They buy your services, and also as part of that, they implement Favro. But now it's like you get two challenges stacked here. It's like, now they come to you not only with, okay, we need to be more agile and adaptable to market change, we also need to be fully distributed. So I guess this is it's good business for you. A lot of people need a lot of help, and I think maybe we can use this as a segue into your part here, and hopefully, Lina, we can go back a little bit in the Q&A here, in the end. But we do want to make sure we save a couple of minutes for you as well, John.
Thank you both. Thank you, Lina. Very good insights there. And you mentioned, being good for business, right? I mean, I think Agile is just, if you weren't Agile or didn't have an Agile mindset before this all happened, you almost have to now. Agile, it's all about adapting to change. And, both large organizations, but also smaller studios. Like I'm working with Lina right now at Bonfire Studios to help, not so much with their transition to remote, but just as they move to different phases of their project, how much process, how much tooling do they need? So segueing, into kind of more of those challenges, kind of the benefits and the challenges. I'm going to share my screen here again. Just so you know, everybody who's listening, one of the benefits of using Favro to do this presentation is, and I'm going to share this collection with all of the people who attended. All of these cards are clickable. I'm going to make this a public collection so everyone will have access to it and be able to comment on the cards even. But if you want to connect with Patrick or Lina, we have links in here to connect with everybody and their organizations. And you'll find that throughout the entire collection here. Everything's clickable. There's going to be not only links to examples, but also links to articles that I've written, articles that other people have written related to that particular topic. So moving on to the remote game studio and just remote work in general. I mean, that's one of the main reasons everybody's joining, as well as getting to hear from Sigurlína. One of the things that has really inspired me when we started kind of this move to remote work is this quote right here by Jason Fried and David Hansen. They're the founders of 37 Signals, the makers of Basecamp. Offices have become interruption factories. The ability to be alone with your thoughts is in fact one of the key advantages of working remotely. So, I mean, you said it, Lena, and I absolutely 100% agree as somebody who used to work in a large open plan studio, just a complete interruption factory. It's very difficult to focus. It's really difficult to get real work done. And as these two call out in their excellent book, Remote, which was written way back in 2013, so they're kind of ahead of their time. Most of the real work happens when you can truly focus. And a lot of the real work before coronavirus, COVID, was happening at home or on the weekends anyway, when people could actually concentrate and they weren't constantly interrupted, or their schedules weren't Swiss cheesed, as you say, by all the interruptions that happen in an office, especially in an open plan office. So this next quote, inspiration, Martin Mikos, CEO of HackerOne, this was from an open letter that he wrote to basically the world as soon as people started moving to remote work en masse. The Industrial Revolution brought us the idea that work is a place different from home and that work is done in physical proximity of many other people. It is the idea of the joint workplace that is the anomaly. Working from home is natural. As somebody myself who's worked remotely for a very long time, both when I was working for Favro directly and also working distributed in San Francisco in hands-off Favro days, and now primarily on my own, I have very much appreciated working remotely. It gives you such a higher quality of life. I do think I'm more productive. And I always kind of felt that going into an office, which I've done with larger contracts, does feel like an anomaly, as it says here. It's why do we all have to be here? And why do we all have to be here 8 hours or more a day? You know, I'm a big fan of Jeff Sutherland's Scrum deliver twice the work in half the time, right? And I'm a big believer in that too. I think if you work the right way, if you work in an agile way, you really can deliver twice the value in half the time. There's not this need to be putting in the hours, punching the clock, so to say. So some of the benefits, right? Lower overhead. Again, you click on each one of these cards. When I share this with you, you'll see these broken down into detail. But a lot of the benefits here are pretty obvious. If you don't have an office, it's going to save the business a tremendous amount of money. As we talked about as Patrick talked about with Lena, being able to have a truly remote first organization lets you recruit the best talent, regardless of geographic location. You're also going to get the diversity more naturally, regardless of geographic location. You'll be able to bring in different cultures from different parts of the world. You know, you'll be able to recruit from places that aren't as expensive, taking into account the socioeconomic factor. There's so many benefits in my mind to having a remote first organization, and the best talent and diversity are just, you know, two of those huge benefits. I have a quick example in here, and this is to illustrate how Favro can be used and really should be used by your entire studio, not just for development, not just for art asset creation, but we have studios, we have organizations, both small and large. Favro has organizations, both small and large, using it to run their entire organization, including HR, recruiting, marketing, live ops. You can see all of these different collections here in this sample game studio organization, representing how you really can truly run your entire organization out of this single tool. Everything from, you know, your recruitment pipeline to, again, marketing, finance, so on and so forth. Happier teams. And this really leads back to a lot of surveys are being done right now. Are people happier working remotely? And I knew the answer to this way ahead of the pandemic. The answer is yes. Maybe Patrick's point to extroverted versus introverted holds true here. Maybe the extroverted people aren't as happy. I don't know. But the actual polls being done and studies being done point that to almost 80% of people polled are happier working remotely, even taking into consideration the interruptions that wouldn't normally exist with kids being at home, with having to do the homeschooling, all of that. You know, I never had to cope with that before the pandemic. It is certainly a challenge. But even taking those things into consideration, people just feel generally happier. And happier people lead to happier teams, and happier teams, it's been proven time and time again. That's why a big part of my Agile coaching is doing team happiness surveys, Kaizen, as you can see here, which means continuous improvement for the better. Happier teams lead to increased creativity and increased productivity. It's just a no-brainer. And the big reason, a big part of the reason for the happiness is no commuting. I mean, it's been said that the average commuter spends 300 to 400 hours per year commuting on the road, stuck in traffic. You know, trying not to go crazy, maybe listen to the podcast, whatever the case may be. But you get all that time back with working remotely, and you can use it any way you want. So some of the challenges, right? So studio culture, people always say, okay, are we gonna, if we're working remote and distributed, are we gonna lose our culture? And I think one of the big things to really call out here, one of the big insights that I had and like to share, is that the move to remote is going to amplify your current culture, your current studio culture, right? And it's going to amplify both the strengths and the weaknesses. If you had a weak studio culture before, where there wasn't a lot of trust, where there wasn't a lot of autonomy, it's going to be very difficult for you to move to remote and distributed team, remote first way of working. Now, as Lena said, Bonfire Studios, it was very almost effortless, maybe not effortless, but very easy for them to make the move to remote. That's because they're a very, you know, they might not call it agile, but they're a very flat, very progressive organization by nature. There's a ton of trust, a ton of autonomy. I can tell from working with them that exists. And I would say that was the #1 reason that the move to remote probably went so smoothly for them. It's because they had that inherent, strong, autonomous, accountability studio culture. I get this question all the time, right? If you're used to working in an office, you know people are working, or you think they're working because you can see them, right? And now people say, well, how do I know people are working? How do I know they're putting in the hours? And there's all these things like, should we track their time online? Are there ways to track their time remotely? And that's just the wrong answer. It was the wrong answer when you were co-located. It's the wrong answer certainly when you're working remotely. This whole idea of tracking activity, tracking tasks, tracking hours, it's just utter nonsense, right? An analogy we use in Agile all the time is keep your eyes on in a relay race, keep your eyes on the baton, not the runners. It's the baton getting around that track 4 times or however many times that wins the race. It's not the runners. So yeah, you want to make sure that your people are engaged. You want to make sure that your team members are engaged. But what you should really be watching is the flow of value through your organization. Whether that's delivering content for a game, whether that's delivering a new game or the progress towards that new game. It's not how many tasks an individual is completing or how under or overutilized they are. You should rather be looking at the actual flow of art assets. How are they flowing from start to finish? Are you, reducing cycle times, reducing lead times? Same thing for feature development. And I have a quick example of this here, built right into Favro, where you can see, you can turn on these flow-based metrics like time on board and time in column. And you're able to quickly see how long a particular feature or art asset has been at any particular stage. You can also quickly look at things built into these charts, like a burn down chart, and see, okay, out of all the things that we committed to for this particular 2-week iteration or sprint, whatever you want to call it, how are we tracking towards completion with a velocity-based prediction into the future? Are we going to finish on time what we committed to? So this doesn't take into account how busy people are, how many hours they are working. It's just purely tracking the flow of value. How quickly are we getting things done? And that's what you should keep your eyes on. Too many meetings. This is something that comes up all the time, right? Too many meetings. And I kind of stole this from somebody at Bonfire. They said too many meetings are the symptom. They're not the problem. And I absolutely agree with that. Too many meetings when you go remote means basically that, you know, you probably don't have as clear goals, short-term goals and direction as you should have, right? You probably also don't have the ability to visualize the flow of work or visualize your work in progress. And you probably don't have a way to communicate where the work is happening, in line, in context for where the work is happening. Because once you get those things, it's almost like magic. The meetings go away, right? You don't have to have so many ad hoc meetings where you're including way too many people, because people can see the work. They can communicate where the work is happening. And I believe that that's a big thing that Favro in particular brings to the table. Collaboration and innovation. All right, so a lot of people think we're going to lose the ability to collaborate, especially across teams of teams. We're going to lose the ability to innovate. We're going to lose our creativity. That's absolutely not true. I think this is a huge opportunity, this move to remote, for teams to actually improve their innovation, improve their collaboration. And that's taking into account the talent, worldwide talent, the worldwide diversity. All of those things are going to add to that innovation and collaboration. There's also things you can do just from a process standpoint. I have examples of them here where you can build in, they call it upstream Kanban, right? But it's really an innovation process pipeline. And I have an article here about it, which you can read later, talking about how you should take your innovation process, what it is you're going to prototype, what it is you're going to build. You should take that just as seriously from a visualization standpoint and a thoughtfulness standpoint as you take your actual getting your product work done, your feature work, or your art asset work done, right? So take that innovation process seriously. And if you can visualize it, it's just going to be all the better. As far as cross-team collaboration goes, I have a quick example here. Say you're a feature team and you're working on this particular feature, take cover behind objects, and you're trying to test it, and you realize, as you can see in this comment stream, again, communicating where the work is happening, you can see, okay, I'm blocked. I'm a QA, I'm an embedded QA on this team. I'm blocked. I can't actually test this thing. It actually needs some sort of a block model, at least art asset, to test take cover behind objects. So you call that out. You probably add the person who you think can help to this particular feature or feature card, maybe flag it as blocked like this. And then what you can do, because you can have the same cards in multiple places in Favro, and you can also have different teams' boards in multiple places in Favro. This is where the true power of cross-team collaboration comes in, even remote. You could say, okay, well, we're going to actually add this to this particular card to the internal art asset team's Kanban board, showing that it's blocked. Maybe this gets expedited for the team to build that at least block model art asset that's unblocking the feature team. You know, you're probably doing feature-based development, and you always want to make sure that your feature teams aren't blocked. So just by doing this, this internal art asset Kanban board exists here within the feature team collection, but it's also, of course, where it lives, where it was first created, in the internal art asset team collection, where they have their very own backlog, and they can see that this just popped in and it came from the feature team. The feature team has a block. So moving through to kind of the pure solutions, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but remote first culture, this is obvious, right? If you can have all the playbooks, you can have all the tools, whatever it is, all the processes in place that you want, but if you don't have a remote first studio culture, where you have the principles and values of trust and accountability. You truly believe in servant leadership instead of command and control. We're going to tell people what to do and how to do it, right? It's the opposite of that. Servant leadership is so important. We're going to be more accessible. We're going to be more available than ever. And we're going to help clear the way to that flow of value more than ever when you make that move to remote. Now, adding value versus showing up, there's no showing up anymore, right? There's no office, there's no studio physical studio to show up to. So it's all about adding value as an individual contributor, and that should be built into your studio culture. Agile, again, Agile is just, if you weren't Agile before, you have to have an Agile way of working now, or I just think it's not going to work, right? So you have to have all of the principles, all the values that are built into Agile, that embracing change, right? And it's not just at the team level. And I truly believe, because I've worked with tons of teams around the world, that agility in game studios, for the most part, for the vast majority of studios, never made it past the team level. You have lots of Agile teams, but I'm talking about true business agility, where the entire business of running a game studio is Agile. And I don't, we can't go into the details on that, but that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And that's what needs to happen now when you're a remote first studio. The entire running the business of a game development has to, from soup to nuts, from the development team all the way up to studio leadership to marketing and everything else that's included, has to be Agile as well. Studio cadence, you have to have that rhythm, the heartbeat of the organization. You have your long-term check-ins for the entire studio, and you have your short-term check-ins at the team level. And that has to be in sync and aligned across the entire organization. And just by doing that alone, you're going to reduce a ton of meetings. You're going to think, okay, that's just adding more meetings. It's actually not. It's going to do the opposite. It's going to reduce a ton of meetings. Studio flow, which we talked a little bit about, but not just at the team level, but also for the entire organization. There's ways to visualize that flow, especially using a tool like Favro. You've got to have the self-managed teams. And what metrics, should you track when you move to remote? And I'm a big believer in actionable Agile metrics, flow-based metrics, metrics that measure value instead of capacity, metrics that measure not how many tasks somebody is completing, but rather how quickly are we delivering art assets? How quickly are we able to deliver a character? How quickly are we able to deliver a prop? How quickly are we able to deliver a new feature, depending on the size of that feature, the relative size of that feature? Those are the things you should be tracking, because it's an old adage, but you get what you measure. If you measure activity, you're going to get a lot of activity and maybe no value. If you measure value, you're going to get a lot of value. And last but not least here, remote collaboration tools, right? We're all living in Zoom. We're in Zoom right now doing this webinar. It's an amazing tool for synchronous meetings, whether they're ad hoc or planned. Slack, Favro uses Slack. I use Slack at Broadcove Insights. Slack is just a fantastic tool for asynchronous general discussion. What it lacks is the ability to have that synchronous and live and asynchronous contextual conversations where the work is actually happening. And above and beyond just the ability to plan and collaborate, the communication aspect of Favro, especially for remote teams, I just think is so important, so critical, so key. One last quick example related to tools and collaboration. Here I have this might be an art director dashboard, where they're working with both internal teams and external teams, and their backlog represents and is broken down as such. They're able to see at a glance where each and every asset is in the art asset pipeline, just by looking at these relations, because the cards exist both here in the backlog and also on the actual art Kanban or pipeline boards for both the internal teams and maybe an external team. This is also supposed to be illustrating, you can add custom fields like polish level. What polish level do we need to get these assets to for this particular release or for this particular milestone? Tracking flow of work at different levels. So here we might have characters that we need for release 1.0, right? Weapons that we need for release 1.0 or for some subset release. And we're tracking those at a very high level. Whereas we're tracking the subset, the actual characters that make up that bundle or that content drop, whatever it might be, on different boards. So we're tracking at both the high level and a level beneath for the detail. And again, tracking across multiple teams, both internal and external, bringing maybe your external development closer to your actual studio so it actually feels like part of your actual studio. And since you're remote now, it doesn't really make a difference, internal versus external. Okay, so success stories. I just want to point this out. We have learn.favro.com, customer success stories. You can go here. There's a number of interviews that when you could actually have interviews face-to-face, pre-pandemic, that I ran for Favro with some of the best, including Lena, game production people in the world. And all of those are available here at this link, talking about their experiences and their use of Favro. And I also want to point out, before we open it up to Q&A, that Favro and Broadcove Insights have partnered to bring the world, people who may be struggling or may want to, maybe not struggling, but would like to improve their remote organizations. We put together this 5-day Favro Remote Game Studio Quick Start package. If you click on this link here, it shows you everything that's included, including a 25% Favro annual discount, 2 trainings and certifications for up to 9 people each. But the big benefit here is we do all the work. We help you, we sit down and we help you figure out what should your organization look like in Favro. How are you going to get the most wins? What should your collections look like? How should your team be structured, so on and so forth. We also integrate to all of your other critical studio applications, such as Slack, maybe you're using Jira, GitHub, G Suite. Favro integrates to all of them so that Favro can truly become your studio's single source of truth. And that's a big part of what this 5-day Favro Remote Game Studio Quick Start gets you. All right, thanks very much. And I know that we had a number of questions coming in as Patrick and Lena were having their discussion. I'm going to, because we probably won't be able to answer all your questions, I'm going to take all of those questions and add them here after the webinar. And when I share this out, I'll also have the answers typed up. So we'll make sure we answer all your questions, but we should be able to answer at least a few of them online right now.
John, I've been busy, in the meantime here, answering them in written form. So if you could, do exactly what you said to post them in this public Favro collection, that would be great. If you can, grab the questions and also grab my answers and put in there. But what I would say is that there's several questions that ties into one thing, which is a bit on the balance between the level of tasks versus managing by objectives, managing flow. And a standard answer to this, as I was writing there, is that a really good starting point is to have kind of a cadence and a structure in the following way. You will have a product backlog in Favro where you have high level objectives. You make sure you write out what the purpose is of this objective, what are the key factors for success that you want to measure. And in some cases you can't measure in, but still that you have these factors written there. And then you can have these cards on that high level travel on a Kanban in an executive collection. And then you break down that backlog into sub stories that are a little bit more concrete. And here you can use the power of Favro that boards can be in more than one place. So you can have, let's say, that backlog then also visualized in a collection which is only for a dev team, and then another one which is only for the marketing team, for example. And this high level objective or epic will be broken down into stories that are relevant for this dev team and this marketing team. So then the people in these teams will get the overview of, kind of how does this fit into the bigger picture, but at the same time, you don't have too much stuff, visualized. And, these stories in turn that are broken down, they will be committed to a board that has maybe, it's maybe a Kanban or a sheet or a timeline. You can just flip the view depending on what you like, as John was showing. And the task level should really be, using that kind of, checklist or task list functionality on the cards, where you will, just write out the various tasks. You can just check them when you're done, and then you can use like at, same way as on, Twitter or something like that, to the person who's assigned it. So it's like, okay, this task at, let's say Patrick, and it will show up in my, my cards, and I will know, okay, this is my thing. So in this way, you bring people together on the same view, but you're still quite specific on, what is the individual, tasks for people. And then you run this whole thing in a cadence where you have, a short Monday meeting where you kind of just look at this board, get together on Zoom or whatever you're using, and you're like, okay, this is what it looks like, this is the status right now, this is what we should do this week, this is what we should complete by this week. And then every day you have a quick stand up, have a quick look, where you are, what's holding you up. And then on Friday you have a retrospective and a review, in a bigger group where you brief everyone on what is completed, that week. And you can even use Favro for that. If your cards are well written enough, you can actually use the cards as a way to demo the thing that you completed that week. So, with that kind of workflow that I just described now, very shortly, you will have a fantastic start. And that solves a lot of problems. And I think that touches upon, many of the questions that were asked. Over to you, John.
Good summary.
Thanks.
That really sums it up right there. Right? If you have that cadence and you have the visualization, it's going to make the move to remote so much easier. And not only is it easier, it's just going to make your whole studio that much more productive in general.
Super, thank you so much, John. It was a,
Thanks,
to have, Lena part as well. And she was running to one of those stand-ups I was just talking about. So, hey, you got to keep that cadence. So it's perfect. We got it live in practice now. I hope that, you would like to attend one of our future webinars. And as John said, this collection will be public, so you will be able to access it, and you will be able to see all the questions, all the answers, or even watch this again. And as part of that, the recording of this webinar will be live next week. So if you want to spread this to any of your colleagues or friends, feel free to do that. And if you have any other questions, whatsoever, just contact us. If you need to get John on board to help you with your transition to Agile and distributed, he can help you with that. If you have any questions about, Favro as a tool, just ping us. And I hope to see you soon.
Great. Ciao. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.